Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here in the Dana Wiley Gallery for the first ever Rodney Veals Inspired by live podcast recording. Give yourselves a round of applause for coming out here tonight. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to Gathered by Ghostlight and the Dana Wiley Gallery for having us here. Just a couple of quick announcements before we get started, everybody. So I am going to turn things over to Curtis Bowman, who has a couple quick announcements for you before we get the show started.
Hello, everybody. I am Curtis Bowman. Thank you for joining us in the Dana L. Wiley Gallery featuring Mike Elsaw. You can see the beautiful work on the wall there for this exciting live podcast of Rodney Veals Inspired by. I am the Director of Engagement for CultureWorks and a member of the EPIC Committee. We named our committee from our agreed-on goals to educate, promote, inspire, and connect. So we are EPIC, a community of arts lovers doing what arts lovers do, putting together performances and collaborative experiences. This event is the first of what I will hope will be many events that the committee will bring to you through the Dana L. Wiley Gallery featuring Mike Elsaw. The committee would like to thank Dana L. Wiley for launching us and for hosting us in the gallery. We're extremely grateful to Think TV for making this broadcast possible and to Rodney Veal for his tireless commitment to the arts in our community. It is the intention of this series to explore thought-provoking subjects through the viewpoint of fascinating and captivating individuals. Tonight's podcast features 3 such people. Countess Winfrey is a choreographer and a dancer with the Dayton Contemporary Dance Company, and I have seen her dance. It is mesmerizing. Shon Curtis is a photographer and creative artist, and I have seen his photographs, and I wish I looked that good. And Rodney Veal is one of my absolute most favorite people, an independent choreographer, a visual artist, a documentarian, and the host of this podcast. If you would please make sure that these little infernal devices in your pocket are actually turned off or silenced and they will not vibrate in any way, shape, or form, and give our artists your best attention. CultureWorks welcomes you, the Dana L. Wiley Gallery welcomes you, and the EPIC Committee welcomes you. Thank you so much.
Hi, this is Rodney Veal, the host of Rodney Veals Inspired By, and we are coming to you live, the first time ever, at the Dana L. Wiley Gallery in the Arcade. We are super excited today to have an audience. Acknowledge yourselves. Yes, super cool thing to have. And I have 2 people on the panel to talk about Afrofuturism and creativity and inspiration. And I'm super excited because I know these 2. We go back in many ways. First off is Countess Winfrey, who is a choreographer, visionary choreographer, and artist, and a fabulous dancer with Dayton Contemporary Dance Company. Shon Curtis is a multi-hyphenate man, and you'll get to know that in this conversation, but his photography is so outstanding and stellar. This man captures you in such a beautiful way, and I have 2 portraits that he's done of me, and I treasure those. And we've always had these really great conversations. But what's really great is that the 3 of us wrote articles about Afrofuturism in the Dayton Daily News. Nick Harkman, who is in the audience, who's the spearhead of that with the Dayton Daily News, and so we're going to use those articles as a basis and foundation for the conversation. So, Shon Curtis, we go way back. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
So let's just dive in. For those who do not understand and know, give a definition in your words as to what Afrofuturism is.
Oh, we're throwing this.
Someone.
He's going to kick it off. All right. For me, Afrofuturism is a daily practice, a daily understanding of my contribution to those that are coming after me, but also honoring those who were before me. I'm doing it through my arts, through my words, through living. It's definitely a living art for me to be a practitioner of Afrofuturism. So it's a difficult thing to define. It's a movement. It's more than black art. It is life. Write that down.
He drops the mic every time. It's just the thing. It's Shon's way.
Yes. I really love that definition. I think that I agree that Afrofuturism feels like this huge umbrella, and there's so many things that fall under that umbrella. I think for me, when I think about Afrofuturism and the way that it shows up in my work and my creativity, is it pushes me to think about imagining something that I've never seen before. And that imagining is informed by my present day experience as an African American woman, and the experiences of the people in my lineage, my ancestors. And so I think that it's kind of multifaceted. It kind of incorporates several generations, present day, past, and future, all within Afrofuturism. And so I think that it's really wonderful to be able to witness other artists embody this concept, and everybody's interpretation of it is different. But I think that that's the really beautiful thing about it, is because there's no definite definition. It's all about creativity in the way that like you personally imagine it, and then the way that we get to experience it. So that's the way that I kind of see Afrofuturism.
Such a better definition. I love that definition.
And this is why I love our conversations, because I love the way you spoke about the fact that it's individual. Yeah. And that's one of the things that it's really countering, this notion of a monolithic behavior or artistic practices of a group of people. And so we have a lot of shades, so to speak, as Black folks. And I think that is reflected in how we approach art and art making. Yeah. And that's what I love about the fact that as someone who is fast approaching elder status, which is where my focus in the article came from, it's refreshing to see that this younger generation of artists is really being bold and adventurous and taking steps outside the realm. So let's talk about that. So in Countess's article, Countess, you had talked about this really great experience that you had, and I had a small part to play in it.
Oh,
and it was at the Cincinnati Art Museum. Talk about this experience, because I explained to them what it was, and it involved dance and art.
Yes. So I was commissioned to create a site-specific work at the Cincinnati Art Museum in 2022. And the purpose of this commission was to bring dance to one of the oldest museums in the nation. And they were highlighting two specific Black artists at that time in the museum. And I didn't know this until I dove a little bit more into the project, but it is not as common for Black photographers, Black artists to show up in those types of museums, maybe in a gallery of some sort, but I didn't realize that it took as long for Black art to show up in a museum space like the Cincinnati Art Museum. And so they were really honoring Black voices during that particular year. And the two artists that they were highlighting were David Driscoll, a visual artist, and the Kamwangi Workshop, which is a group of Black photographers that were based in New York. And so they wanted a site-specific work that really highlighted those artists but brought dance into the space. And so when I first saw pictures of the museum as I was writing my proposal, I was like, well, how am I gonna put all of what I wanna put into one space? But they told me that I could use whatever I wanted to use. And so I ended up creating a work called Homage, What Was, Is to Come. And it celebrated the idea of talking about or kind of walking through the past as an African American experience, the present, and also an imagination of what the future is or what the future would be. And so we started in one place of the museum. The past was kind of based in the front part of the museum where there were like beautiful big columns, concrete, very non-colorful, but meant to represent the past. And then once the dancers finished that specific exhibition, then the audience would move to a different space, and that space was the present. And in that present space, we talked about, or they danced about, and we talked about issues that we are facing today in the African American community. And then the audience moved into what I called the future space. And this future space was this kind of like grand staircase arena inside of the Cincinnati Art Museum. And it was meant to represent the idea of like what our Black futures could look like, or my imagination of what our Black futures could look like. I had a wonderful griot that took us as a narrator from one place to the next. And I probably could have done it 1,000 different ways, but I thought it was important to really honor the past and the present before we could even talk about how we would want to proceed into the future. And so there was a book that an anthology that I got in order to kind of help me create this work, and it was called Black Futures. It was an anthology that was created during the pandemic, actually, but there was a huge picture in it that said there are Black folks in the future, and that particular picture really, really stuck out to me. And as I was creating this collaboratively with the griot, who is a spoken word singer, artist, wonderful woman who works in the community very often. I was talking about, like, how do we imagine what the future looks like? And it was one of my first times really thinking about imagining a future, imagining what our Black experience could be like in the future. A lot of times, because I'm in the arena that I'm in, we talk a lot about like present day or past experiences in the dance world. And so I really wanted to think about how we could imagine, or how I could imagine, or push myself to imagine what the future of our culture could look like. And it was kind of like scary because there's no blueprint, you just gotta kind of create as you go. But also it was exciting, and I feel like it kind of sparked my interest in imagining more, like not just having these older school stories and then bringing those to life on stage, but then how do you create a whole new world? And as I dove more into it, I was like, oh, people have been doing this for a long time. But it was cool to kind of have my first opportunity to think and create in that way.
Yeah, it was, and the small part that I played was just being on the board of Ohio Dance, and we were
Rodney played a big
role.
role.
Like the people behind the scenes, kind of helping the museum make it happen, and so getting to witness that process for Countess was magical. There's a record of it. I think we did record it for Think TV. So if you get a chance, go to our website, look at the segments that are on. It'll give you just a taste of just how imaginative her work is, and so it's really cool. So Shon, and this is interesting because Countess, myself, and two other people, Ben Bauman and
Thomas Troutman.
Thomas, there we go.
Thomas.
When you get this age as an elder, you forget names. We were all together. We came together for a panel discussion about 2 years ago. I realized, going back to my notes, I realized there's a photograph of all of us and that Shon took. Yeah. And that's where I fell in love. I fell in love with Shon. Shon's work as a photographer, and this is really, there's a question in there, I promise you, is his ability to capture the spirit of the person that he's taking a photograph of. It's real, it's vibrant, there's an authenticity that is unmistakable, undeniable. He has this way of pulling things out of you as a subject in his work, and it's just thrilling. So hopefully you'll get to see his work on the walls here soon. But Shon, talk to me about the journey to that process of being a photographer, because this wasn't on the bingo card of life.
Yeah, no, nowhere near close. I became a photographer out of necessity. I was a musician. I went to Stiver School for the Arts. Those of you who are familiar, it's a wonderful magnet school here in Dayton, Ohio. And I did music. I was a musician. I was a tenor saxophonist, jazz musician. I wanted to be John Coltrane. I was not going to take no for an answer. I would spend my weekends playing Jazz Central. I didn't have a drinking problem, fortunately, so I didn't run into that problem. But I loved music. I loved having access to an instrument at a young age, and it kind of got me through a lot. So I got to Stivers. They found a notebook. I don't know what I was thinking. I left a notebook in one of my classrooms, and it had a lot of writing and had a lot of poetry in it. And that's when they discovered I was a writer. And this was my junior year. So they were very upset with me that I had spent all this time in music and no time in writing at all. So they then almost pushed me into being a double magnet of creative writing and music. So then I started doing a lot of spoken word shows, touring a little bit, got to go to Louder Than a Bomb, which is this show that kind of gets you to Brave New Voices, which is the younger version of Def Poetry Jam, right? Yeah, Def Poetry Jam, which was, what it was for HBO. I loved that. I always wanted to be on that show, never got to be on that show. But I did a lot of spoken word for a long time, and I got really burnt out. I got really tired of traveling and performing all the time. So I started a magazine. I needed a photographer. I became the photographer I needed. And that was my long roundabout way of getting into photography eventually. And then it was everything. It was everything I needed. It was everything I didn't have. But I mean, everything also ties in, right? Like my music, my writing, all is encompassed within my visual storytelling, right? Because I think that's how I would refer to myself, as just a visual storyteller. So I use, the experiences in being in jazz and improvisation and reading between those lines, and the exercise of using different writing styles to figure out how to graph a story. And then now I take all of that into being a photographer and telling somebody's story with an image. So yeah, that was a roundabout way of how I became a photographer today.
Following up on what was interesting about the fact that I know these two folks is that, and I was thinking about this as multi-hyphenate. They're visual storyteller, not just a photographer, not just a choreographer, not just a TV host, not just a. It's always a sense of this multi-hyphenism, and I it's very curious to me, especially with artists of color, is that do you think that is just built into our DNA that we must do it all?
Yeah,
I mean, so let's talk about that. I mean,
that's a good question. That's a really good question. I feel like we are always so used to being what it is that we are needing, right? Like we are always used to coming into something out of a necessity, out of this gap that needs to be filled, and a lot of times, we're our own solution. And I think that that's a part of the Black experience, is being your own solution. So that's how I found my way into each art, is I needed this thing. So let me go and do this, right? So yeah, it's definitely a part of this Black experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that I feel like I've talked about this before with someone, and the conversation kind of led into this place of, like, artists, it feels like you might be an artist in a particular field, but truly you end up being an artist in your life. Like, it's really a lifestyle. Yeah. The way that you cook becomes a part of your art, and the way that you decorate your home, the way that you have your car, set up. Some people like to have very artsy cars, some people like to have very clean cars, but I think that it really is like a lifestyle. So it's interesting to hear you tell your story about how you went from music to writing to photography, and even now how they all inform the work that you do. And I remember as I was working on this project at Cincinnati Art Museum, the Kamwangi workshop photographers talked about how they would use the sounds of jazz as they walked around the city photographing people along the streets of New York. And I was like, oh, I can see it. I felt like as I looked at their photographs, I could really see it. And I think for me personally, like, my mom was like a huge arts lover, so we were always at jazz concerts, musicals, dance concerts, and my brother's also a musician. So art really feels like a lifestyle for me. And I think the way that I see wanting to do things in the world, it always incorporates art in some way. Like, some of my favorite hobbies incorporate art, and not necessarily art that I have anything to do with. I can't play an instrument. I wish I could, but I can't play an instrument. I'm an okay writer. Dance and choreography are definitely my lane, but I really have a high appreciation for speakers, for singers, for instrumentalists, for visual artists, and I feel like all of it kind of lives in this realm that I love to visit. So. Yeah, that's how I
resonate
would
with
say.
that. And you're a good writer. You're a great writer.
no, she's a fantastic writer. If you haven't a chance, go to the Dayton Daily News website and check out the articles, because it's, that, and it goes to that point of that multi-hyphenism, because out of necessity. And that speaks to something that, it was the line that stuck in my head, that when you talked about Afrofuturism, and you said that it's kind of a metaphor of America as an old house. So this question of us, as Black folks, and Black creatives, talk about that metaphor, because I think that's important for people to understand and unpack, that Afrofuturism is not replacing.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
yes, I think thank you for saying that. So I love watching house shows, flipping houses, all those shows. I love to watch them when I can catch them. And so as I was thinking about this particular article, I was like, oh, Afrofuturism is kind of like a concept that walks into this house and flips it. Like all of the old ideations, all the old paintings, all of the old wallpaper, all of the olds, the things that, and metaphorically the things that we have encountered, I'm sure as Black artists now, but that our ancestors have encountered as far as barriers and, all of the things, generational trauma, all of the things that we have incorporated and that we have felt in our lives. I think what Afrofuturism does is strips all those things away, and it gives you liberation to create and build a new home, to put up new walls, to put up new paint, to put up new paintings, to create different feng shui, to recreate what was old, maybe even inside of the same structure, but make it new, and to make it feel more liberating to be inside of, to make it feel more welcoming, more inclusive, more, the word I'm trying to think of is like, it makes you feel like, oh, this feels snug on me. I'm not trying to put it on. It fits, yeah, I'm not trying to put it on because somebody else said that this is the shirt I should wear, or this is the house I should buy, and this is the way it should be decorated. No, and it's like, sometimes you can think that like, oh, I need to buy this house and this is the way it was, so I have to keep it this way. But I love that Afrofuturism allows you to say like, oh no, I can actually strip all this away, and I can re-put up what I want that fits my life, that fits my ideation, that fits my morals, my values. And so in a very long form, essentially that's the way that I saw it when I first started thinking about this particular article.
I'm Bonnie Miles, Membership Coordinator of CET. Thank you for listening to Rodney Veal's Inspired By. This podcast is a production of CET and Think TV, two local PBS stations. As PBS stations, the work we do online, on air, and in the community is supported by listeners like you. If you're enjoying the show and would like to support our work, please consider becoming a member at cetconnect.org or thinktv.org. Plus, when you sign up to donate at least $5 a month, you'll get access to special members-only streaming videos on the PBS app through Passport. Learn more at cetconnect.org or thinktv.org.
If you're enjoying this conversation, The Art Show, also hosted by Rodney Veal, is available to stream anytime from anywhere on YouTube or the PBS app.
And that struck me, because one of the things I was thinking about was cultural redlining. Redlining exists for housing, but redlining exists in culture. So this notion that there's only one way that art can be represented, and who is the person that represents it, how is it represented, becomes a real question for us as Black creatives, because there's always someone else's, they may not even see the bias. It comes out in the language and their tone and how they interact and engage. They don't realize, no. That's the old way of thinking.
Yeah.
But, and so you're younger, and that's close, as I'm approaching that elder status, like I said, 1 year and I'll be 60.
It looks good on you.
I'm trying.
Come on now.
Like, don't cry.
Tell that to your skin.
That's right.
Beautiful.
Shea butter is the best thing in the world. If you don't, and for the folks who are not of color, that's a real thing. One of the things that you talked about, Shon, which I thought was really great, you said that you talked about Afrofuturism can be a catalyst for rebirth, which is kind of a building on what Countess say. Talk about that, because it can be and there's a rebirth for the city of Dayton.
Absolutely. I think we've been looking at a renaissance, for a very long time, and living in it and experiencing it all at one point, right? Like the idea of Afrofuturism giving you this liberation, this freedom to reimagine and reclaim something, is that individual part of yourself, right? Like it is this idea that you can hold on to tradition and elevate and evolve and become something new or create something new in our field. We're creating something new all the time, so it's like a starting place for us. So we're always reimagining our work and reimagining what it looks like and what it'll be like and how anyone gets to experience it. I think about that. Like I like that you said it's a lifestyle, right? Like it fits the lifestyle, because I think the idea of liberating ourselves and taking that responsibility that liberation actually is, because it is freedom is a real responsibility. Like you have to understand that you can't be callous with your freedom. So, why not reimagine what your freedom looks like, right? Like if you're an artist, reimagine what this space looks like, these four walls that we have. A house is the perfect metaphor. We get to flip our house every day and no one can tell us otherwise. So, you take it and you be responsible for it,
I really love that you said be responsible for it.
Yeah.
I would never thought about it from that perspective, but it is a responsibility to kind of hold on to your freedom. Yeah, I like that.
And so let's talk about that freedom. Because one of the things that's really interesting about Afrofuturism, it talks about imagining a space. And so imagining a space where that freedom can exist, where that liberation can be explored. Do you think it's easier, as speaking as someone from this particular generation, do you think that the spaces are opening up, or are there still obstacles and barriers to that liberation and freedom? I'd be afraid.
Never. I think it can be both, right? I think that we can experience, things changing and see that, physically how it's manifesting change here in Dayton. Like this, what is this? The kitchen incubator that's over here, that's like being led by 3 black women, right? Like I'm like, this is amazing that this is happening, right? Like to understand that that's something new that is changing that we wouldn't have had before isn't to say that we don't still experience racism or we don't still experience these setbacks or these things that are going to hold us from truly liberating, right? Like, think it can be both at the same exact time, right? Like, we definitely get to see change happen, but we also get to experience, the bad. We get to experience these, I'm not even in the conversation for this grant, or, this gallery doesn't want to receive work from a black artist, but they don't want to say that. They'll say your work is too urban, right? Like there are definitely these barriers that we have to face, but a part of the exercise is breaking through them, right? Like rebelling. I think that's another thing that a lot of artists identify with, is how much of a rebellious spirit you have to have in order to even have the audacity to create,
Yeah, I think to add to that, what you spoke about, our freedom being a responsibility, I think that freedom is a practice, and the practice starts, to me, as a mindset. And so when you do come up against those barriers, the practice and the mindset of feeling like, okay, well, this is a barrier now, but it's not going to be my barrier forever. Or how am I going to push past this barrier? Maybe this barrier is here, but it might not be here. And I think that the mindset around freedom is truly kind of the root source to the practice of freedom in our creativity. And so I agree in the sense that, like, there are more opportunities for us to express ourselves and express our imagination of an Afrofuturistic realm and creativity. But I do think that there's still work to be done, for sure.
Absolutely.
So I'm grateful that there have been opportunities like being able to write the article and being able to do the work that I did at Cincinnati Art Museum and many other examples. But I do think that there's still much work to be done.
Absolutely.
So in that process of that work, do you think that do you feel more hopeful now in the place of that liberation and freedom, even though there are obstacles and barriers? Are you more hopeful now? I mean, because of some of us who are in the generation, not my generation preceded me, not so much. I mean, other than so how do you take on that generational perspective? That's a little different. We sometimes have a tendency. I have a tendency to move a little cautiously sometimes, but not always. Not always.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. My grandmother, she just passed last year, but she lived to be 102. Oh man. 103, sorry. She just turned 103 in May, and then she passed in July. But she was born in 1920. And my father is a baby boomer, my mother's a baby boomer. And so it's been interesting for them to tell me stories of their lives, essentially, and to even think about like my own life. And so I think to your question about like generationally, do we feel more hopeful? I think that I've been able to really see the groundwork that they did, the breadcrumbs that they put down, the roots that they left, in order to feel empowered to take a step forward. I feel like I remember my grandmother talking about being in rooms with Martin Luther King. She lived in Memphis. My grandfather was a pastor. And so I think hearing her like tell these stories, like we just sitting up here and I'm like, wait, what? But to me, like those kinds of things that she was involved in the civil rights movement, like were steps forward. And then even the things that like my father and mother did as I was growing up were all steps forward. And so I think, and while they had their own barriers during those times, it was very liberating to hear their steps forward, so then it could help me say, okay, well, if they can do it during that time, then what steps can I do right now to push myself forward? And I think that those examples were very important for me to see, empowering for me to see, and also like to see history and my own family lineage connected was also empowering, like to actually see the connection. And some of those things I didn't really get until I moved here, until I started dancing about work that was really steeped in the African American experience. I actually learned more about my African American history through those specific examples of works that I've done and the stories that my parents and my grandparents have told. So I think that I do feel hopeful, and I think my hope also lies in hoping that my steps will create a path for my children and their children and the other children that come generations after me.
Word. For me, it's really, there's this obligation I have to dream. I have to dream. I owe it to those before me to continue dreaming, right? Like I think that, I think of like those. I remember sitting down with my grandmother and her explaining to me what her experience was growing up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and then her family's experience growing up in Mississippi, and how different they were, but then also understanding that she was telling me my experience is not going to be the same. I'm going to have an experience, right? I'm going to be able to tell a story, but it's not going to be the same. This journey is going to look different for me, but understand that we're all on the same journey, right? We're all still walking this line here. So I have an obligation to contribute something to their legacy and to leave something for my legacy so that those that's coming next have a story that they can look back on and be like, okay, I learned something from here. I know where I was, right? I know where we were. I know where I'm coming from. And it's interesting because I have these conversations with my mother, and she doesn't have much want at the moment to learn about her past, which is fine. I get that. I think that I'm fortunate to be in this very curious generation, right? Like we're very curious about where we are, where we're from, and then also we're this tech age where we can, find these things out, right? Like we can figure out, what tribe was here. And here's this bloodline, and here's the tracing of, like I found out I was Monsa. And I had to talk to Mama Nazipo, if anyone's familiar, to explain to me how to even say Monsa, right? The clicking wasn't clicking for a while until I talked to her.
In a South African dialect.
Yeah.
Because it's very, very,
So I try to live in that obligation, right? I try to continue to create work with that obligation in mind of, okay, I owe something to those that did this for me, that laid this groundwork. Yeah. I'm always in with I'm gonna let you know. It's like my telltale sign.
Yeah.
Nothing's coming after that.
Yeah.
I love it. I mean, when I love this phrase obligation. Do you think as Black creatives that we carry an undue baggage in that sort of obligation? Because I see sometimes there's a tendency, and I know it's going to be it's a critical statement about a lot of art out there, that it doesn't really go beyond the surface. And I have noticed, and I'm not saying this as a blanket condemnation, I feel as though the art that is being reflected by the two of you and others, I think about Kevin Harris, I think about Bing Davis, I mean, who's the OG of carrying through an experience. It's always that obligation that it's just baked into our DNA. That the source material is Africa. It's even though there is a denial of that. Yeah. So, do you think that, especially with technology, because Afrofuturism implies technology is a part of this, do you think because you guys are in that generation that it's technology native, do you think technology is making the Afrofuturist stance much easier to kind of go forward as a pathway, or is it a hindrance?
I mean, I'm gonna say that it's definitely allowing us to express and experience more, right? Like I don't want to think of it as a hindrance. I mean, I think that. Well, I'm not. You know what? Let me not say that, because I was going to say what I always hear my elders saying about kids and technology and how they always on their phones, and I'm like, no, that's not the route I want to take with that. I think that the access to technology gives us a stepping point to continue that reimagining that we keep talking about, right? Like we have access to these tools that give us a library right in our hands, right here, right now. I don't have to go downtown, even though we do have wonderful libraries here in Dayton, Ohio. I want to go ahead, get them a great shout out in case there's any representatives here. I didn't want to. But yeah, we have access to this wealth of knowledge right here in front of us. So that in itself speaks to our ability to continue Afrofuturism. I think about this letter that Toni Morrison wrote. Not even a letter. She wrote the eulogy for James Baldwin, and James Baldwin is a huge influence for me. I'm gonna figure out where I'm going with this in a second. She talks about this kindling, this flame on this candle that flickers, and that flame is James Baldwin. That's my root. Had I not had access to reading that eulogy and understanding the magnitude of how one writer decided to recognize another writer in passing, I wouldn't understand that kindling is the kindling that's in me to create art. I wouldn't be able to find that because I wasn't in, and it's in the New York Times. If anyone has a moment, find it. It's the New York Times eulogy that Toni Morrison wrote for James Baldwin. It is beautifully written. I could only imagine having someone write anything about me when I leave, right? But that's the journey. We're trying to leave this footprint so that somebody could possibly write something about us when we leave. But no, without technology, I wouldn't be able to get to that. I wouldn't be able to find that. I don't know Toni Morrison.
Yeah.
I wish I did.
Yeah, I definitely think that technology kind of like opens this portal of possibilities to us as Black creators right now in today's generation. I personally don't have as much of a relationship with incorporating technology into my work, but I do think it is something that I would be interested in. And I have loved when people have done it, when people have incorporated technology into their work, and it has created this imaginary world in this way. I think that it feels very fascinating to me, but I feel like I have not yet anyway, I don't have any relationship to creating from a technological space, but I really do appreciate it, and I do appreciate what you said about it giving us opportunities to grow and expand our curiosity. I really agree with that. Like I do feel like our generation is very curious, and like we're kind of like in between. Like we're not like super. Because we grew up and then we had phones. We didn't always have phones, So, but we understand them enough, And so I think it's actually a nice balance because it allows us to be curious, but also be able to read a New York Times article, even in print, not on our phones. I think that there's like we can access both, and so I think that kind of duality allows us to have a proximity to our art in a particular way. So kind of leaning back to what you said about substance, like the multiple layers, I think that that plays a part in it, I think.
Oh, yeah. No, and as someone who dabbles, and you
you really know it. You've got it.
It's a part of my multidisciplinary practice, and I know that entering into that world as an African American, it is kind of fraught because it's this unexpected. One of the things that's really interesting is when people try to explain to me how the technology works as if I've never touched a device. And that was in grad school. I was like, okay. So not aware that maybe I do not have the language, but I may not possess it. And I think that's another part of the stripping away of the house, is that sometimes there's language that is used and engaged in a way that the person doesn't really understand, that can come off as a barrier to being engaged in the conversation, to be a part of the process of moving things forward, because they don't recognize that, yes, there's more. Because the surface, when we talk about race, it starts and stops on the surface. And so that's why having this conversation with you is so important, because it goes deeper than the surface. So with that in mind, this is the kind of conversations we have all the time. So when we get together, we're drinking coffee and we're having a good time. We're talking about all these things, and we go off into our worlds and we make and create, and we then come back together. I'm kind of curious where you guys are at with art, with your own art. Like, what are you doing right now? Because I think that's important, because this is about the future. So, what's going on with you guys?
So right now, I've been kind of working this idea about working with food, working with black chefs specifically. There was this documentary or docu-series, on Netflix called High on the Hog. Right? Yeah, it's amazing production. They found a group, I think in DC, that works exclusively with heirloom produce. So in essence of understanding, the context is, in the ships on the way to America, our ancestors had rice and beans and other native foods braided in through their hair so that when they got here, they would be able to plant and have native food when they got here, because they didn't know where they were going. This group looks for various heirloom produce and cooks and has a brunch club with that's purely eating these heirloom items. So I took this concept I had about working with chefs and documenting a day in the kitchen for a chef, to looking at black chefs and them contributing one recipe to a cookbook and doing it in a photo essay form of heirloom recipes, and creating a cookbook that is an heirloom that I hope to be able to leave to everyone who wants it, right? Like, it's this idea of leaving traces of who we are in my industry as a photographer. That's what I want to contribute. So that is my current practice of Afrofuturism, is trying to get this book together and out and published and whatever has to happen. I don't know. I never made a book before.
Yeah, that's cool.
Thank you.
We'll talk. We'll talk. That's what we do. We talk.
I love that.
Yeah.
I think I'm in a space, like a kind of like solo incubator space. I feel like over the past couple of years, I've done a lot, like it's just been a lot of projects, which have been so wonderful. Gotten to do a project in the Rotunda here last summer, which was basically a collaboration of different artists of all genres coming together and just creating live art, and it was a really great experience. I've gotten to create some works recently, and I feel like I haven't had enough time to like come down from those experiences because I've kind of jumped from one to the next to the next. So in this current moment, I think I'm just kind of wanting to understand like kind of who I want to be in the art world. And it's been really wonderful to kind of spread my wings and try new things. And I think now I'm in a space of trying to like hone in and sharpen and refresh. So I am going to be choreographing a play soon. I'm very excited about that.
I'm very, very excited about that. Stepping into a new world.
Yeah, stepping into a new world.
That's what we do.
It's going to be a cool experience. So I'm looking forward to doing that, and honestly kind of looking forward to taking the summer to kind of be down, refresh, kind of build my business a little bit more so that when I am taking on a new project, I have a little bit more clarity. Trying to think about if I'm going to go to get my master's. Haven't quite decided yet.
Ooh, we are definitely going to have a conversation about that one. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, thinking about that. So
The Ohio State University, I'm just saying.
Man, I'm trying to get it while I'm still dancing. I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing to find, but that's kind of where I am right now.
It's so super cool. And so it's a good place to be. So I want to say thank you for your friendship, because this is what rejuvenates me. Is this like the fact that I get to hang out with these young people who are so creative and have these big ideas and they're pursuing them. And they are pursuing them here in Dayton, Ohio. They could choose to be anywhere else. They could be anywhere else because they're that talented, but they're here, and I want to say thank you for taking out the evening. This has been a pleasure and a joy always. Thank you as an audience for the first time for us having a conversation in public for the podcast. I am a grateful man. I live a very rich life, and this is the richness I get. So, and I want to share it. So. That's our podcast.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rodney.
Thank you to Dana Wiley. Thank you to Epic. Thank you to Curtis. Thank you to Thank you, Dayton, Ohio, for being the coolest place on the planet. And that's what you need to start saying. You are the coolest place on the planet. Knock that chip off your shoulder, boobs. Knock it off your shoulders. All right.
Thank you, man.